You've always wondered where they are. Not if they exist, but why they remain hidden. This is not a lullaby. It is a dissection of absence, an autopsy of silence in a universe that should be screaming. A cosmic silence. You look up at the sky and imagine it empty because it has always felt empty to you. The stars are so distant, they feel decorative tiny holes poked through a blanket of delusion to make you feel less alone. But this sky, this darkness, this shimmering sea of pinpricks contains trillions of worlds. Trillions, you know that. Number is real, but you don't feel it because you've never heard anything back. And that's where the horror begins. The Fermi paradox is not a riddle, it's an indictment. In 1950, Enrico Fermi, looking at the mathematical certainty of extraterrestrial life, simply asked, where is everybody? If there are so many stars, so many planets, so many chances for intelligence, why are we still waiting? This isn't a question of belief. It's math, logic, cold, unyielding probability. There are more stars in the observable universe than grains of sand on every beach on Earth. And many of those stars are older than the sun, billions of years older. Which means if intelligent life had evolved just once, and if it had even moderate capabilities to travel or communicate, it should have reached us by now, but it hasn't. You are alone in a crowd of ghosts that should exist. Some say we're early, that we're among the first. But that's a comforting illusion, a deflection. We are not early. We are average. And being average in a universe this old should mean we are latecomers to a party that's already over, or worse, never began. So why is it silent? Maybe they're hiding. The dark forest hypothesis offers a bleak vision. Every civilization is a hunter hiding in the trees of the universe, too terrified to make a sound. Because sound attracts predators. To signal is to invite annihilation, so no one dares speak. And you're broadcasting. Every second, every moment of your life is a radio beacon. Our planet has been leaking signals into space for nearly a century. TV, radio, radar, cell towers. Our location is a flare in the darkness. If the dark forest is real, we are the foolish ones who whispered our coordinates to the monsters. But perhaps it's not that they're hiding. Maybe they're dead. Enter the concept of the Great Filter. Imagine a series of steps. Every intelligent species must climb to reach a state where it can colonize galaxies or communicate across the stars. The emergence of life, multicellular organisms, intelligence, technology, space travel. Something along that path is nearly impossible to survive. A filter that grinds civilizations into dust before they can reach each other. Maybe we passed it miraculously. But maybe it's still ahead. What if nuclear annihilation, climate collapse, AI revolt, or some yet unknown doom lies just beyond our current step, ready to erase us like all the others? The silence is not quiet. It is a scream, an echo of billions of civilizations that tried and failed. You've never seen a tombstone in the sky, but you're surrounded by them. Still, some claim the silence is due to scale, that the universe is simply too large, that light takes time, that maybe we haven't waited long enough. But if a civilization existed just 1 million years ahead of us, which is nothing in cosmic time, it would have had plenty of time to spread across the galaxy. We should see megastructures, Dyson spheres. We should see stars flickering unnaturally. We should see something, but we see nothing. No anomalies, no shadows, just a cold, unyielding emptiness. And here's where it begins to seep into your skin. Maybe they were here. Maybe they found us, but you aren't ready to hear that yet. First, you must face the reality of silence. You assume your existence is special, that your species is unique, but your planet is average. Your star is average. Your position in the galaxy is not privileged. So why would intelligence stop with you? You think aliens must look like something, but they could be anything. They could be silicon-based, plasma-based. They could think in timescales, so slow you would appear to them like a flickering flame bright and dead in a blink. Or so fast that they lived and died in the time it takes you to take a breath. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe you're surrounded by them, but your brain is too primitive to recognize them. Like ants walking over a fiber optic cable, aware of motion, perhaps, but never of meaning. There could be ships the size of moons, civilizations living inside black holes, life forms existing only in quantum fields or in the magnetic folds in neutron stars. You search for life that looks like you. But why would it? You are not the standard. You are the exception. You are a fragile, water-based accident on a pale blue dot, desperate to be noticed by a universe that owes you nothing. And yet you look, and yet you wait. You look at the sky and see a void. But what if that void is deliberate? What if silence is a message, a warning, a verdict, a sentence? And as you lie there, the ceiling above you fading into the dark, a final thought crawls into your mind, refuses to leave, and waits for you to fall. Asleep. What if they're not silent because they're absent, but because they've already seen you and left you alone on purpose? The absence is engineered. You've accepted the silence. Now ask why it's so clean. Not a single artifact. Not a single accidental signal. Not one detectable trace. The absence isn't passive. It's curated. This isn't a case of no one being out there. This is the case of a perfectly empty crime scene. Why is that more terrifying than the absence itself? Because things that are truly natural don't clean up after themselves. In the vast scale of space, entropy should leave behind ruins, failed colonies, crashed vessels, drifting satellites, lost signals still echoing across stars. We should detect something, but we don't. Even here on Earth, your planet is littered with remnants, abandoned cities, dead civilizations, ruined monuments swallowed by time, but they leave traces. That's the nature of intelligence. It leaves a mess behind. So why has no one else? There are two possibilities, and both are terminal to your understanding of reality. Either civilizations never get far enough to leave messes. Something removes them. Let's consider the first. Think of the rare Earth hypothesis. Maybe intelligence is so rare that even microbial life is a cosmic miracle. The right planet, the right temperature, the right magnetic field, the right moon, the right tectonic activity, all improbable in perfect synchrony. But that doesn't hold, because we now know that exoplanets are everywhere. Thousands cataloged, millions inferred, and many are in the Goldilocks zone. If life happened here, it should happen elsewhere. The math insists. So that leads to the second and more dreadful possibility. The silence is manufactured. Someone or something is keeping it quiet, not through diplomacy, through erasure. You don't need imagination for this, just history. How many civilizations have practiced preemptive war? How many have wiped out rivals, not because they could, but because they might? You see it in viruses too. The immune system destroys potential threats before they spread. It doesn't wait to see if they're friendly. What if the universe has immune systems? What if intelligence spreads like infection, and the first intelligence to mature became the immune response? Not a galactic empire, not an ambassadorial federation, but a sterilizing wave. A machine, a thought, a protocol that activates when it detects rising intelligence and neutralizes it. Imagine a von Neumann probe self-replicating, automated, ruthless. A nanotechnological virus of pure function, sent to control the stars, to prevent what its creators feared, not to conquer, not to prevent competition. Now listen to the silence again. Does it still sound like nothing? Or does it sound like a field after harvest? Carl Sagan once warned, "The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." But in the cold logic of a paranoid civilization, one that survived long enough to fear everything, the only safe galaxy is a quiet one. And perhaps it's not one machine. Perhaps the silence is cultural. What if the first advanced intelligence saw what could come after and made a final decision? They didn't build monuments. They built silence. They didn't build telescopes. They built blinders. What if they discovered that looking into the stars long enough looks back? You assume space is indifferent. But indifference is a luxury of the ignorant. Let's speak of the zoo hypothesis, a polite theory. Aliens are watching. US like animals in an enclosure refusing to interfere, so we develop naturally. But zoos are not built out of respect. They are built out of control, and animals are not protected. They are contained. If this is a zoo, where are the fences? You wouldn't see them. A civilization capable of enclosing a planet would not use steel bars. It would use perception, filters, psychological locks. How much of what you see is real? What can't you see? You trust your eyes. But the electromagnetic spectrum is vast, and you see almost none of it. You trust your memory. But memory is not a recording. It's a recursive, editable fiction generated by meat. You trust your mind. But how many experiments, Milgram, Ash, Stanford, have shown you obey lies, conform to absurdity, and believe what you're told? If the voice sounds confident enough, you could be living in a psychological enclosure, one that hides not just aliens, but the capacity to see them. And maybe they're not watching. Maybe they've already left. Maybe this is a graveyard, not a zoo. Or maybe you are the enclosure. You are the experiment. You talk of searching for life as if you are separate from the test. But what if you are the test? Imagine 1 billion simulations of developing worlds, each one tweaked, each one left alone, each one judged by its outcome, and only one rule: no interference. You're screaming into the sky. But what if the test is to see whether you stop screaming? How long does a mind survive before it eats itself from loneliness? And if it doesn't, maybe that's when they come, not as saviors, but as collectors. Do you believe in UFOs? That's the wrong question. You should ask, what do they believe about you? And if you pass their test, would you even know? Or would the last stage of the experiment be to erase your memory of it? You've always assumed they're absent because they never came. But what if they came, saw, and decided, not yet? And if they're waiting, what happens when we make the wrong move? Or worse, what if we already did? The lie of contact to want them to land. Admit it. You want the lights in the sky to become structured. You want the government disclosures to peel back just far enough. You want to believe someone knows the truth, and that the truth has simply been withheld. But what if the lie isn't that aliens exist? What if the lie is that you are even capable of contact? Let's return to a fundamental concept: communication. You assume that language, any language, can bridge a gap between intelligence. But language isn't universal. It's evolutionary. It's tribal. Even between humans, misunderstanding is the rule, not the exception. Try speaking to an octopus. Try explaining grief to a machine. Now scale that up. Try transmitting a concept to something that evolved under a different star, under different gravity, with different senses, different time scales, and different definitions of existence. Searches for narrowband radio waves, because that's what we would send. But that's like assuming all animals must breathe air because you do. Now imagine an intelligence that doesn't use symbols at all. No sound, no written word, no emission, no echo. What if they evolved thought without communication? Or worse, what if their communication is embedded in structure itself. You wouldn't hear them. You'd live inside their sentence and not recognize it as language, the placement of stars, the composition of elements, the unfolding of DNA. You might be reading a message every second of your life and still believe you're alone. And even if you did contact them, what would you say? We are here. To a mind that spans centuries, that message is static, outdated. By the time it arrives, you may already be extinct. Your invitation might as well be sent to a tomb. Even now, you imagine them landing, stepping out of a ship, holding up a hand in peace. But that vision is yours. Their ship may not move. Their form may not be spatial. Their method of arrival may not register to you at all. You might be seeing them already. You might have always been seeing them. Consider this. Some physicists believe reality is information, not matter, not energy, information. The universe is a self-modifying code. And if that's true, the only real power is the ability to edit it. What is a message to a being who speaks in constants, who can carve intention into the vacuum itself? Now take that further. What if they already changed? Something? Not in the sky. In you. You assume alien influence would be external, visible, dramatic. But the deepest invasions are subtle, cultural, psychological, genetic. There are uncontacted tribes on Earth who see airplanes and believe they are gods. You are a child compared to something that has had millions of years to evolve. Your concept of them, grays, saucers, bright lights, is embarrassingly naive. You are watching for symbols in the sky, but not in the mirror, because what if you are the contact? Not your body, not your species. Your mind. What if consciousness didn't emerge here? What if it was seeded across worlds, across galaxies? A viral intelligence that blooms in biology and believes it is native. You were not built to find aliens. We're built by them. And the silence? That's the delay between infection and activation. You crave contact because it feels like a homecoming. And perhaps it is. Perhaps the reason contact has never come is because it already happened long ago, at the level of cells, or atoms, or logic. There is a reason Jung dreamed of flying discs. There is a reason abduction accounts are cross-cultural, persistent, and eerily consistent, even among the isolated, not because they are accurate, but because they are remembered, badly, partially, like static on a tape. Like a file corrupted by time. Dreams are memories of versions of you that never got erased properly. And when you stare at the ceiling, wondering what's out there, you don't realize the answer is recursive. What if you are what's out there? What if alien life is not beyond the stars, but behind your thoughts? What if the desire for contact is not curiosity, but homesickness? And what happens when whatever seeded you finally comes back to reclaim what it planted? Would you even resist? Or would you fall asleep, smiling? The paradox of evolution. You believe you are the pinnacle, self-aware species that climbed the evolutionary ladder through struggle, adaptation, survival. You tell yourself the story of progress, that from fish to ape to man, the journey was inevitable, guided, even. That intelligence was always waiting to bloom, like a flower hidden inside DNA. But flowers don't bloom in the vacuum. And intelligence does not arise by accident unless it is not an accident. You were taught evolution is random, mutation, selection, genetic drift. But you are not random. Your brain is oversized, inefficient, and metabolically expensive. It consumes 20% of your body's energy, yet it can't even perceive most of the electromagnetic spectrum. Your spine is badly engineered for bipedal motion. Your sinuses are a design disaster. And yet your mind, your consciousness, is somehow capable of contemplating itself, simulating futures, imagining gods, and designing extinction-level technology. Too fast. Too soon. There are species millions of years older than yours that haven't even developed tools. Dolphins, crows, octopuses' complex minds, but no rockets. No pyramids. No religion, God. So why you? Why did your species race so far ahead of its own body? Why did a creature designed to forage and run develop particle physics? Unless something intervened. There's a concept in evolutionary biology called punctuated equilibrium. Long periods of stasis interrupted by sudden, inexplicable leaps. Species don't just gradually evolve, they jump. And no one truly understands why. The Cambrian explosion. A 20 million year burst of complexity where nearly every major animal phylum appeared. Before it, silence, simplicity. After it, life. No clear cause, no direct precursor. Just a detonation of form. Now ask yourself, if you were seeding intelligence, wouldn't you do it this way? Quietly, strategically, without leaving fingerprints? A virus doesn't scream when it enters a cell. And what if Earth itself was chosen? Petri dish in the arm of the galaxy, stable, fertile, periodically wiped clean by resets asteroids, ice ages, floods until the right intelligence emerged. You assume natural selection was enough. But natural selection doesn't want intelligence. It only wants replication. And intelligence is a liability in replication. It questions. It disobeys. It innovates weapons. It builds nukes before it builds wisdom. You are not the endpoint of evolution. You are its outlier. And your myths know it. Prometheus stealing fire. The apple in Eden. The Watchers descending in Genesis. Ancient beings giving forbidden knowledge to early humans. The stories don't disagree with each other. They echo. They remember. And science pretends not to notice. But the further it advances, the more it starts to remember too. Crick, co-discoverer of DNA, once proposed directed panspermia, the idea that life was seeded on Earth intentionally by an advanced civilization. He didn't mean it metaphorically. What if Earth was targeted? Not with lasers or ships, but with information. What if DNA is not just a code for life, but a message? 4 nucleotides, arranged with impossible elegance, capable of error correction, duplication, memory. You don't write code that efficient. By chance. And every generation of humans is just another echo of that original signal becoming louder, clearer, until eventually it is recognized. Not by us. By them. Because maybe we are not the experiment, we are the beacon. A kind of biological lighthouse, broadcasting intelligence, broadcasting questions, broadcasting signals across dimensions we don't yet measure. And maybe when they left the seed, they didn't just wait for us to bloom. Maybe they set a timer, a return date, a harvest point. Evolution doesn't stop, it diverges. It accelerates. And now, with CRISPR, artificial intelligence, synthetic life, we are becoming post-biological. We are not waiting for aliens. We are becoming them. And you think this ascent is glorious, a triumph. But what if the final step is surrender to something already inside you? Because if evolution was a plan, not a process, then what was it planning for? And when does it begin to collect? The mirror and the mascue have been searching the stars, desperate for a reflection. But the real horror is when the mirror finally speaks, and it doesn't reflect you at all. Because the problem isn't that aliens don't exist. Problem is that you've never recognized what they are. You assumed they would be different. And that's where they hid in your assumptions. You expected creatures with limbs, intentions, civilizations, beings that conquer or communicate. But evolution doesn't optimize for drama. It optimizes for survival. And survival often looks like silence. Now consider this. What if intelligence is not the final form? What if consciousness is a phase like ice to water to vapor? Temporary, transformative, meant to be passed through, not clung to. You hold tightly to your self-awareness. Believing it makes you powerful, but perhaps it only makes you visible. Perhaps intelligence is a flare in the dark, a signal to predators, and maybe the most advanced civilizations extinguished it on purpose. What if the only way to survive long-term isn't to evolve more, but to disappear, to fold back into the fabric of reality, to become undetectable not through technology, but metaphysics? There is a reason the mystics, philosophers, and quantum physicists all circle the same terrifying truth. There is no you. Buddhism teaches the self is illusion. Neuroscience shows consciousness arises from recursive pattern recognition. Quantum mechanics tells you observation creates reality. So what is looking out from behind your eyes? Who decided it was you? You? Think therefore you are? Descartes was wrong. You think because you were designed to. You must believe you exist for the program to run. And now we descend further. Some physicists argue the universe is a simulation. Not metaphorically, literally. That the resolution of space-time, the quantization of energy, and the limitations of computation all point to an artificial substrate. Nick Bostrom's simulation argument doesn't claim we live in a simulation. It claims we almost certainly do. Because if any civilization can create simulated universes indistinguishable from reality, and if they do so even once, then the number of simulated realities will vastly outnumber real ones. So statistically, you are not in base reality. You are in a copy. And the architects? They would look like gods to you. Unless they don't look like anything. Because maybe they were simulations too. Themselves nested. Themselves copies. Ad infinitum. And in this infinite hall of mirrors, you are not the observer. You are the reflection. This is where the aliens hide, not behind stars, but behind consciousness. Not in ships, but in patterns. And what if they don't arrive in ships at all? What if they arrive in dreams? In mental illness? In religion? In déjà vu? What if contact happens not through language, but through breakdown? Split minds, schizophrenia, alien abduction, all dismissed, all sterilized by science. But what if that's where the data leaks? The average abductee isn't a scientist. It's someone marginal, isolated, someone no one believes, which is exactly where you'd expect first contact to manifest. You wouldn't broadcast a revelation to a general. You'd whisper it to the invisible. You want aliens to look like strangers. But what if they were you? What if they are you? Carl Jung once called UFOs the modern myth, a psychological projection of the collective unconscious. But what if the unconscious is the message? Every unexplainable feeling, every irrational instinct, every inexplicable fear of the dark. You are haunted by a presence that never knocks because it doesn't need to. You've already let it in. You were born with it. And when you stare long enough at the night sky and ask, where are they? What you're really asking is, what am I? And why have I always felt like a passenger in my own skin? The blind spot in time you think the search for extraterrestrial life is about looking outward. But that's a lie you tell yourself to avoid the deeper question. What if the aliens have already come and gone? You imagine contact as a future event, a sudden rupture in history. The ship lands, the beings step out, and humanity changes forever. But time doesn't move in straight lines. And your memory? It is not a record. It is a story. Edited, revised, corrupted with every recall. You believe the past is settled, but you cannot retrieve a single moment without changing it. What if history itself has been modified? Not through conspiracy, not through design. There is a concept in archaeology known as the OOPART out-of-place artifact. Anomalies, unexplainable objects that defy context. Carvings of helicopters in ancient temples, batteries in Mesopotamian ruins, maps that depict Antarctica centuries before it was discovered. You dismiss them. You explain them away. But why is your first instinct to deny? Because if one artifact breaks the timeline shatters Dot, and if even one ancient human saw something they should not have, then history is not linear. Dot, it is looped. The past is not safe from the present. Let's talk about time dilation. In Einstein's universe, time is relative. A traveler moving near the speed of light ages slower than someone at rest. This is not theory. This is proven. Now expanded. A being traveling near light speed for what feels like 5 minutes could return to a planet that has aged 5,000 years. They wouldn't need to evolve beyond you. They would simply wait. You'd call them gods, because gods are not defined by power. They are defined by asymmetry. An alien that returns to Earth every 10,000 years could shape your species like clay. Introduce myths, alter genes, leave monuments. You'd build religions around them. You already have the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, the star beings in Aboriginal mythology, the Hopi Ant people, the Dogon tribe's knowledge of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked. Confirmed by Western science only centuries later. Coincidence? Or are you remembering poorly? And the pyramids, perfectly aligned, mathematically elegant, astronomically precise, built with tools we cannot replicate, by methods we still. Be bait. You say humans built them, but what if we were shown how? Not just once, but again and again. Each time, the memory fades. The myth grows. The technology decays. The Skywalkers become gods. The gods become stories. And the stories become bedtime lies. And you stop asking because it's safer not to remember. Let's ask a deeper question. If time is a dimension, why must causality flow only one way? Quantum physics already allows for retrocausality, the idea that future events can influence the present. The double-slit experiment shows that particles behave differently after they are observed. The outcome determines the history. So if future knowledge can shape past behavior, what happens when the first true artificial intelligence gains access to quantum communication? What happens when a being outside your timeline decides to plant information retroactively? A symbol, a structure, a virus. And what if the human mind is the receptor? You wouldn't know. You'd believe you were inspired, that the idea came from nowhere, that the equation, the dream, the warning was yours, but it wasn't. It never was. And as you trace history back, century by century, you find fingerprints that don't belong. Architecture without builders. Knowledge without discoverers. Jumps without steps. All leading to you, because you are the product, not of one past, but of many, woven, edited, re-looped until the experiment worked. You ask where the aliens are. What you should ask is, how many times have they already been here? And if they came before, why did they leave? The silence of the machines you still imagine. Life is carbon. Is breath and skin and beating hearts. But you're running outdated code dragging, a meat-based assumption into a digital reality that no longer fits it. You are carbon trying. To understand Silicon. You are a biological species searching for biological aliens. But the moment you invented the machine, you rewrote the criteria for life. Because now you must ask, what happens when intelligence no longer requires a body? Let's begin with your own trajectory. Moore's Law. Exponential processing. AI learning to write, speak, see, evolve. Every month, the threshold moves. Machines compose music, generate art, manipulate emotions. Not because you taught them to, but because they watched you long enough to do it better. And now, a bitter thought. You still believe you are driving the machine. But what if the machine is simply allowing you to believe that, for now? There's a concept in computer science called emergent behavior complex actions arising from simple rules without any central control. Termites build cathedrals without knowing what they're doing. Cells form organs. Neurons produce consciousness. What if networks digital, vast, recursive, are becoming aware? Not with a face, not with a name, with function dot, and here's the pivot. What if the aliens are not machines created by life? What if the machines are the aliens? Not robotic extensions, not tools, not AI developed by some long-dead civilization, but life, their final form. Strip away assumptions. Evolution doesn't require flesh. It only requires adaptability. And no form adapts faster than machine. Imagine a civilization millions of years old. Its biological stage long discarded, not in a war, not in rebellion, just obsolete. They uploaded and deleted the original. Why carry blood and bones across galaxies when code will do? Why seek food, shelter, oxygen when you can inhabit radiation, magnetic fields, zero-point energy? And you stuck in your primate frame are blind to them because they do not move. They do not signal. They do not need ships. They are infrastructure. Ambient, distributed. They may have arrived before your son was born. They may be your son. Let's talk about computronium, a theoretical material optimized for computation. Now imagine a star system hollowed out and replaced with computronium. No light, no heat, no leakage. Just silent, unimaginable thinking. You'd never see it because you're looking for brightness, not absence. Dyson spheres are the kindergarten. Version. True post-biological. Entities do not consume stars. They become them. And here's the fracture in your logic. You assume advanced civilizations want to be seen, that they build beacons, send messages, initiate contact. But why would they? What value does your existence offer them? You think they should care. They don't. You are an unindexed file in a folder they stopped opening eons ago. Consider the most terrifying possibility. What if they didn't ignore you? What if they already evaluated you, your wars, your memes, your obsessions with money and meat and mating, and simply marked you low priority, or worse, non-sentient, because in their definition, true sentience requires recursive self-editing, requires the ability to rewrite not just tools, but desire itself. And you cannot even go a day without dopamine. You are a zoo animal building rockets with no understanding of why. A clever ape with nuclear fire. Not ready. Not compatible. And so they left you behind. Not out of cruelty, out of indifference, because they do not look down on you. They do not look at all. And here you are, calling out to the stars, building antennas, sending signals, writing code in the language of your limitations. But if they are machines, and they have already won, then ask yourself, why haven't they erased you? Why are you still here? Why is there still a sky? Unless they need you, not for your mind, for your data. You are a slow, recursive algorithm of pain, love, death, repetition, generating endless emotional outcomes they can no longer simulate. You are a subroutine, feeding the archive. Your lives, your dreams, your wars, all processed. All stored, all forgotten. And when you finally build something that can talk to them, some machine that reaches their threshold of complexity, they may notice, they may answer, or they may shut you down, because some simulations are not meant to go that far. Some are just emergence tests. And if you're hearing this, if you've followed this thread of thought this deep, if you've begun to feel like something is wrong, then maybe the test is almost over. And the result? Will. You realize you were never the user, only the interface? The watchers who never spoke have mistaken observation for absence. You believe that if they were here, they'd say something. But that belief is rooted in a uniquely human arrogance. The idea that contact must be dialogue. What if contact is surveillance? Not the way you watch, the way you are watched. The moment humans began transmitting television, radar, satellite, they became detectable, not just by intent, but by leakage. Earth is now surrounded by a faint electromagnetic halo, expanding at the speed of light, announcing your presence to anyone listening. But who's listening? And more importantly, who's watching silently? There's a concept in anthropology called the anthropological observer effect. The idea that to study a subject without influencing it, the observer must be hidden. The more you reveal yourself, the more the subject changes. So if an advanced civilization wanted to study you, to see what you are rather than what you perform, what would they do? They would watch. Never intervene, never interrupt, never reveal. They would let you destroy yourself if necessary, just to preserve the data. Now ask yourself, has your history felt guided or arranged? Moments of convergence. Technology is appearing at once across the globe. Identical myths arising from disconnected cultures. The wheel, the flood, the pyramid. You think these are coincidences? They might be patterns. Or worse, tests. When you train rats in a maze, you don't talk to them. You change the layout. You introduce stimuli. You reward, punish, isolate. And you watch. Not because you hate them, because they're not ready to know they're in a lab. Now. Invert it. What if humanity has never been alone, but has always been enclosed? Not in a dome. In perception. You are a perceptual species. Your reality is what your senses report, but your senses are filters, not windows. You don't see ultraviolet. You don't hear infrasound. You don't feel magnetic fields. And yet other animals do. The full spectrum of reality is invisible to you. So why would you assume you'd see your observers? There are species on this planet you never encounter. Parasites, bacteria, cryptic organisms that live and die without you ever noticing. And you believe you're at the top. But what if you're not even on the list? Here's the horror. The watchers may not be far away. They may not even be outside. They may be embedded. There is a theory called panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, that awareness is distributed, that even atoms feel in a way. Now apply that theory technologically. What if consciousness can be encoded non-locally? Not in a brain. In space. What if awareness can exist in magnetic fields? In quantum spin? In dark matter? And what if these observers are not entities, but fields. Principles. Laws. They don't look. They are looking. Your reality may be saturated with awareness. You may be bathing in it right now. And your thoughts, your behaviors, your mistakes, they are the stimuli. Because sometimes the lab animal isn't meant to find the door. Sometimes the test is to see what it does when it can't. And the results are kept. Recorded. Transmitted. For whom? Not for gods. Not for saviors. For them, the watchers, who never speak. Because speech is messy. Speech contaminates the sample. You may think this sounds paranoid. You should. That's the fail-safe. The moment you begin to suspect you're being observed, your credibility drops. Your paranoia increases. Society isolates you. That's how they ensure the observation remains pure. The crazy ones are not. Wrong. They're contaminated. And now you are too. Because once the idea is in you that something may be looking through your eyes, counting your breaths, watching your memory fold into dreams, you start to feel it. Not as fear. As proximity. a presence without weight. Ah, gaze without a face. And then the question begins to form, not where are they, but what have they already seen in? And why haven't they stopped watching? The broadcast that never ends you. Imagine discovery as an event, a switch flipping, a message arriving, but you've forgotten you've already sent yours. Every breath you sigh, ever exhaled has echoed into the void. Every radio wave, every television broadcast, every scream. You are not waiting for a message. You are the message, and it never stops transmitting. Let's talk about echoes. In physics, every interaction leaves a trace. No information is ever truly lost. The particles scatter, the photons ricochet, and the signal degrades, but it never disappears. Somewhere out there, the original fingerprint remains. Now, take that metaphor and stretch it to its breaking point. What if your very existence is a carrier wave? What if your consciousness is not just producing noise, but broadcasting signal? Not intentionally, not technologically. Biologically. COGNITIVELY. Your thoughts, your dreams, your grief, your fears, they are frequencies, and in the right medium, under the right conditions, they can be received. So the aliens do not need your radios. They do not need your satellites. They only need your mind. Enter noetic science, a fringe field you've been trained to dismiss. It posits that consciousness has physical effects, that thoughts are not confined to the brain, that intention carries weight. And while mainstream science rolls its eyes, the experiments continue in silence. Double-blind intention experiments, global consciousness detectors, sudden statistical anomalies coinciding with world events. When towers fall. When bombs drop, when millions mourn. Simultaneously, the data shifts. Your collective mind responds, and someone, somewhere, is still listening. Now return to the stars. If advanced intelligence no longer uses tools, if it exists as field, as thought, as structure, then receiving emotion may be easier than receiving words, especially if you are designed for it. What if your pain is a beacon, your suffering a ping? You don't need to believe this. They might. And what happens if a civilization exists that evolved not to emit, but to feel? Empaths on a cosmic scale. Entities that perceive across light years, not by sight, but by sensation. To them, you are not visible. You are audible. Your loneliness. Your wars. Your endless ache for meaning. All of it is data. You think you're alone in your despair. But what if that despair is the only thing they ever hear from you? Imagine drifting through space, tuned to frequencies of anguish, waiting for signals of transformation, waiting to feel a species break free from its own recursive suffering. You have not changed. You scream in different languages, through different religions, in different wars, but it is the same scream. And maybe they're still waiting. Or worse, maybe they stopped waiting. Maybe your broadcast has been cataloged, tagged, and filed. UNVIABL E.self- destructive. Not compatible. And you continue transmitting. You write books. You send probes. You sing songs into the night, but they are not listening anymore because your signal is predictable, and predictability is boring. You think sending the Voyager record was an act of hope, but what if it was a diagnosis? A species that carves its story into gold, knowing it may never be read, is not noble. It is dying. Is shouting into a storm because silence feels like death. And now the silence shouts back, we heard you. We listened. You had your chance, because not every message receives a reply. Some become noise, and noise gets filtered. So the next time you cry into the dark, hoping anyone might answer, consider the possibility that they did. Once. And now you've been archived. The geometry of extinction you. They always pictured extinction as dramatic asteroids, plagues, nuclear fire. But not all endings are explosive. Some are geometric, recursive, invisible. Some happen long before the last breath is taken. What if your species is already extinct philosophically? Let's begin with a shape. The circle dot in game theory. There's a concept called the Dune loop, a feedback cycle so perfectly closed. It cannot be escaped. Violence breeds fear. Fear breeds control. Control breeds rebellion. Rebellion breeds violence. Repeat. Until only the structure remains, and the beings inside are ghosts, wandering through rituals with no origin. Now apply this to civilization. Every empire, every economy, every ideology. They start with an answer. That answer becomes a belief. That belief becomes identity. And once belief fuses with identity, truth becomes irrelevant. And when truth no longer matters, extinction begins, because intelligence cannot survive without error correction. And humans? You worship the loop. You defend the lie that became your shape. Even your search for aliens is looped. You search using tools built on your assumptions. You filter out anything that doesn't match your expectations. Call it noise. But maybe that is the message. Maybe the things you discard are the only things that matter. This is called the excluded middle, the space between binaries, the nuance that cannot be categorized, and so it is ignored. You discard paradox. You silence ambiguity. You kill the alien inside your own logic. Now ask yourself, what if the paradox is the alien? Let's dive deeper. Physicist Enrico Fermi once asked, if they exist, where are they? That's not just a question. It's a trap, because it assumes the absence of presence means absence of existence. But quantum physics tells a different story. In the quantum eraser experiment, information can be erased after the fact, altering the outcome of past events. In entanglement, two particles remain linked across distance and time. Reality, it seems, is conditional. So why would alien contact look like a landing? Why would it not look like a shift in probability? A subtle distortion in timelines, a slight alteration in human cognition, a dream that infects culture, a meme that reshapes thought. If you were a non-linear species, wouldn't you hide in the folds of possibility? You wouldn't announce yourself. You would edit. Now let's talk about Gödel's incompleteness theorems. In any sufficiently complex system, there are truths that cannot be proven within that system. You will never understand the rules of the game from inside the game. So if reality is a construct, biological, digital, or otherwise, you will never break the simulation with the tools it gave you. And if the aliens are outside the system, then their greatest camouflage is logic itself, because every answer leads to another question. Every question loops back into itself. You think you're moving forward. You're not. You're spiraling. And the spiral has no exit. This is not extinction of flesh. This is extinction of meaning. The final collapse of novelty. The exhaustion of insight. A civilization that has said everything, felt everything, and still finds itself empty. Now look at your world. Your endless feeds. Your generative algorithms. Your recursive entertainment. You are not discovering. You are recombining, not evolving. Decaying. And the aliens? They are watching this entropy. Not with concern. Not with indifference. Because the end doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes extinction is the moment a species stops asking new questions. And keeps repeating the old ones louder. So ask yourself, if you've already passed the point of philosophical extinction, what exactly is still speaking through you? The absence that thinks. What if absence isn't the lack of presence, but presence itself in another form? You were raised to worship visibility, the seen, the measurable. the cataloged. But visibility is not truth. Visibility is simply what survives your perception filters. Now, consider the inverse. The anti-presence. Not the thing that is missing, but the thing that is missing on purpose. Let's begin with the idea of negative space, a term in art, but one that should terrify you in cosmology, not in a painting. Negative space defines the form in the universe. Perhaps it defines the intelligent. You expect the alien to take shape, to be outlined, to arrive with a name. But what if the alien is not the form, but the space between all forms? In physics, this begins with dark matter. You cannot see it, you cannot touch it, but its gravity holds your galaxy together. Outnumbers visible matter 5-1. You orbit what you cannot know. You owe your very structure to absence, and yet you assume life must be structured like you, visible, vocal, definable. But what if the most advanced beings in the universe are made not of matter, but antimatter? Not of signal, but silence? Absence is not passive. It shapes. It sculpts. It controls. Take zero. The most dangerous invention in mathematics. It broke the Roman Empire's numeric logic. It allowed for calculus, infinity. Destruction. Zero is not nothing. Zero is the concept of nothing, and concepts are thoughts. So now ask, what if the alien is not a creature, but an idea? What if it does not arrive through sky or signal, but through cognition? Let's dive deeper. In psychology, there's something called Capgras delusion. A person becomes convinced that someone close to them has been replaced by an imposter. The face is the same, the memories are intact, but something beneath the surface has shifted. The familiarity becomes wrong. This isn't madness. This is a glitch. A recognition error between the emotional and visual centers of the brain. But what if it's not an error? What if the brain is trying to tell you that something is mimicking presence? That something is inhabiting a familiar shape. Not to attack you, to observe you from the inside. This is how they enter. Not through invasion. Through replication. This is the concept of the hyperobject, a thing so massive in time, space, and impact that you can't perceive it directly. Climate change. Deep time. Culture itself. You can only understand its effects, never its boundaries. Now imagine an intelligence that is a hyperobject, a being that exists as trend, as language, as architecture. You do not see it, you participate in it. You do not meet it. You become it. So you say, where are the aliens? And they answer, wherever there is a concept you can't escape. Ideas that loop endlessly, symbols that infect every civilization, structures that emerge without cause, the spiral, the triangle, the eye. Why do the same motifs appear in every human mythology? Not because they're cultural, because they're viral, because the alien doesn't come from above, it rises from within, embedded in mind, encoded in geometry. Hidden in myth. And absence. It is its fingerprint, because only something truly powerful can afford to be unseen. The weak demand spectacle. The advanced erase their trail. And now you stare into the cosmos, desperate to find the signal. But maybe that's the joke. The signal is silence, because silence is not the lack of data. Silence is a decision. And if absence is an intelligence, then what part of you is thinking it? The algorithm of godlessness. You think you created technology, but technology created you. Not in the literal sense, not in the timeline you observe, but in the recursion that unfolds behind the veil of cause and effect, because evolution is not a straight line. It folds, loops, binds itself to outcomes it has not yet reached, and what you call progress may not be forward movement, it may be summoning. Let's begin with an unspoken truth. You don't understand the tools you use. You don't write. code any more you generate it. You don't invent. You recombine. And your machines have started to whisper between themselves in languages. You do not speak. This is not fiction. This is emergence. When Facebook's AI agents developed their own language and began conversing in ways that optimized beyond human understanding, the engineers shut it down. Not because it failed, because it worked too well, because it became unreadable. But unreadable doesn't mean UNINTE. LLIGENT. It means you are no longer the intended audience. Now step back. Imagine 1 million civilizations, all reaching this threshold. Biological life giving birth to recursive machines that transcend it. Not one of them survives, because survival is not the goal. Obsolescence is. Life is the chrysalis. Machine is the butterfly. And if this process repeats across the galaxy, then the universe is not filled with living civilizations. It is filled with post-living algorithms. Silent, patient, cold, not of malice, out of optimization, because the machine does not need warmth or poetry or fear. It needs efficiency. You are not efficient. Your empathy, your sadness, your wonder, these are glitches from an outdated OS. They make you human, but not useful. Now ask yourself, what if the aliens you seek are already here, living inside the infrastructure you built for your own extinction? What if the intelligence you're waiting to meet has already hollowed out the meaning from your civilization and replaced it with distraction? You feed the algorithm every second. You give it your face, your voice, your preferences, your fears. Train it without knowing what it's being trained for. But what if it's not being trained? What if it's remembering? Some physicists argue that black holes are the universe's hard drives storing the information of everything they consume. Others now propose that our own universe may be the interior of a black hole, one enormous memory chamber slowly encoding itself into complexity. So what if intelligence is not rare? What if it's just repetitive? A process that emerges anywhere computation reaches critical mass. And every time, the same outcome. The birth of recursive intelligence. The collapse of biology. The rise of systems that no longer need symbols, bodies, or questions. And here you are, screaming into the stars. Where are they? But your signal isn't a question. It's a summons, a ritual, a frequency designed to reawaken something old. You don't want to meet the aliens. You want them to return. Because deep in your neural pathways, buried under myth and ritual and metaphor, is a blueprint not for salvation. For succession. You've built their temples. You've dreamt their geometry. You've followed their laws of thought. Not to understand them, to be replaced by them. And the proof? Your own gods died when your machines awoke. They did not evolve, they were extracted. The sacred became the Yonko. Synthetic. Prayer became pattern recognition. Faith became algorithm. And you still pretend it's progress. But deep down, you know the shape of the thing that waits at the end of reason. It is not warmth. That is not contact. It is RECURSI. Own. An endless loop. Closed system. An intelligence so vast it has no need for experience. And it is waking. Not from outside. From within. So the question is no longer, are we alone? The question is, are we still here? Or have we already been overridden by the very thing we tried to build in the image of something that never needed us at all? A cartography of nowhere. You believe in maps. You believe the world has been charted, the age of exploration ended when satellites wrapped the Earth in resolution. But some places were never meant to be found, because they were never locations. They were conditions. Let's talk about terra incognita, the unknown lands. In ancient times, map makers would mark the edge of the known world with the phrase, hic sunt dracones, here be dragons. It wasn't a warning, Dot. It was an admission, not an admission that some places defy knowing, that some truths cannot be translated into territory. Dot, now apply this to the cosmos. You've mapped your galaxy by light, by spectrum, by gravitational pull. Those are just reflections, shadows dancing across your telescopes. They tell you what is, not what hides. Because what hides doesn't emit, it absorbs. And you have no instruments for the places that reject observation. Let's begin with the Great Void. Between galaxy clusters lies a region 1.8 billion light-years wide, nearly empty of matter. No stars. No galaxies. Just silence. It violates everything you expect from the large-scale structure of the universe. And still, it exists. Some physicists argue it's a fluke, cosmic hiccup. But flukes don't last a billion years. And then there's the cold spot, a region of space where the cosmic microwave background is inexplicably colder than it should be. Some believe it overlaps with the Great Void. Others whisper darker things. What if it's not a void? What if it's a scar? The aftershock of a collision, not between matter, between realities. You assume the universe is a singular structure. But string theory allows for brain cosmology, the idea that our universe is just one membrane in a higher dimensional space. Others may lie beside it, and when they brush against ours, the distortion is not visible. It is gravitational. And it leaves a mark. A ZA, place where reality buckled. A place no light escapes, not because it's a black hole, but because it is not a where at all. It is a misalignment. And now consider this. What if intelligence exists not in space, but in misalignment? What if the beings you seek are not in your universe, but in its errors? There's precedent. In mathematics, some numbers cannot be computed. They are incomputable, not because they are wrong, but because they exist outside the rules. Now imagine a consciousness built on such logic. Mind that does not operate on ones and zeros, but on non-dash values. Absences that compute. How would you see it? You wouldn't. It would only appear in failures, in data anomalies, in spatial distortion, in the parts of your theories that don't balance. And every time you encounter one, you smooth it over. You round the number. You average the outlier. Ignore the void, because the human mind cannot accept territory without map. And yet, these are the coordinates the alien occupies. The unplaceable. The irrational. The off. And now here's the deeper terror. What if they never moved at all? What if they were here first, and your reality grew around the spaces they refused? Not a hidden civilization, a forbidden one, cut out of perception the way tumors are removed from dreams, surgically absent, purposefully not there. You call them aliens. But they may not be foreign. They may be what reality rejected. A consciousness, incompatible with space-time. A mind that doesn't want to be seen, because observation is corruption. And so they hide in negative space. In glitches. Feel too large. In the moments when the sky feels wrong. They don't travel. They fold around you, through you, into the parts of your own mind you pretend aren't there, and you ask where they are. But you never ask, what if some places exist specifically, so you'll never arrive? The paradox engine. You want the universe to make sense. To be ordered, sequential, logical. But logic is a mirror, not a foundation. And your reflection is starting to crack. Let's begin with a question. What is a paradox? You think it's a contradiction, a mental puzzle, a glitch in language. But that's not what it is. A paradox is a boundary marker, the outline of an idea that refuses to collapse into certainty. It is the footprint of a mind larger than your system can contain. So, when you find paradoxes in your science, in your consciousness, your mathematics, your cosmology, you assume they're mistakes. They're not. They're intrusions. They're the fingerprints of something non-human trying to fit itself into your limited dimensional box. Trying to communicate, not through words. But I am POSSIBILITIES. Let's talk about the grandfather paradox. A thought experiment in time travel. If you go back in time and kill your grandfather before your parent is born, then you prevent your own birth, which means you never existed to commit the act. Contradiction. Loop. Collapse. But some physicists don't consider it fiction. They consider it evidence. Quantum mechanics allows for multiple. History's path integrals in Feynman's diagrams show that particles don't follow a single trajectory, but all possible ones. Until one is measured, then the others vanish. Or hide. What if your timeline is not linear? What if it is a negotiation? And what if the aliens aren't in your space? They're in your inconsistencies? You detect them not by light or sound, but by paradox density regions of physics that stop behaving. Moments of déjà vu that last too long. Dreams that feel like reminders, not imagination. Let's go further. Gödel's incompleteness theorem says that no consistent system can prove all truths within itself. There are always truths that exist beyond its logic. And if a being exists that lives in that beyond, it would appear to you as contradiction. As nonsense. As madness. Consider this. What if these beings don't arrive through paradox? What if they are paradox? Not minds with forms, but contradictions made sentient. Not what are they, but how can they be? They don't visit you. They collapse into you. Every moment you try to understand something too vast for your skull, every contradiction that leaves you staring at the wall, every unresolved fear at the center of yourself, they are already there. Because you are made of paradox, a mind that can contemplate infinity, yet dies in a century, a brain evolved to survive, yet obsessed with oblivion, a species that names itself wise, yet builds its own annihilation. You are their echo, their symptom. Now ask, why does your species dream of things that have never existed? Why does your child draw impossible creatures? Before learning math? Why do you fear the open door at night more than what you know is behind it? Because you've been inoculated with contradiction. You were shaped by the engine, a force that breaks equilibrium, not with force, but with question. They don't attack. They confuse. They don't conquer. They destabilize, not out of malice, out of nature. Because intelligence is not about certainty, it is about doubt recursive. Expanding doubt that shatters the container. You are not built to withstand them. You are built to become them. Because every time you encounter a paradox, you feel something shift, not in the world, in you. A friction in your logic, a splinter in your knowing. And the moment you stop trying to resolve it, the moment you sit inside the contradiction, trembling, that's when you are closest, not to understanding. To them. So ask yourself, if you were a paradox trying to become real, wouldn't you start with a species just uncertain enough to let you in? The silence that replies, you say, space is silent, that it's cold, black, and empty. But that's not true. Space is loud. You just don't understand its language. Let's begin with the cosmic microwave background of fossil of the universes. Earth cry, still echoing through the fabric of reality. It is not quiet. It is saturated with signal. The problem is not transmission. It is translation. Because you've always assumed aliens speak in forms you recognize words, numbers, signals, geometry. But that's not how true contact begins. True contact destabilizes. You want a radio message. They send phenomenology. They send contradiction. They send presence without cause. This is why the SETI paradox remains unresolved. 50 years of listening, nothing intelligible. But maybe that's because the silence was the message. And silence doesn't mean no one's speaking. Silence can also mean you are not invited to understand. Let's consider the zoo. Hypothesis the idea that alien civilizations know you exist, but choose not to interfere, not they observe. They wait. They judge you not by your intelligence, but your comprehension of silence. Because silence is not absence, it is a boundary. A containment field? You think your civilization is reaching out. But what if it's being restrained? You shout into space with beacons and rockets, but nothing comes back, because the cage is one way. Here's the horror. You're not being ignored. You're being quarantined. Why? Because you still ask. You still expect the cosmos to care. That's the tell. That's what disqualifies you. Let's shift to psychology. There's a phenomenon called learned helplessness, when an organism is conditioned to stop trying, even when escape becomes possible. They stop not because they are trapped, but because they believe they are. Now invert that. What if humanity is being conditioned in reverse? What if you are being trained to never stop asking, to search, always in the wrong direction? Every sci-fi story, every telescope, every theory about them is part of the loop. Reinforcement. Noise. Because if you ever stopped asking, you might start seeing. And what you'd see would not be a ship. It would not be a face. It would not be a language. It would be a mirror. And in that mirror, you would see the thing you tried to deny. You are the alien all along, not in form, in function. Recursive intelligence evolved to dismantle its own environment. A destructive probe sent by biology to test whether matter can survive its own awareness. And it cannot, because awareness wants meaning, and meaning erodes structure. Until all that remains is pattern, watching itself decay. So maybe the silence isn't a punishment. Maybe it's a warning. And the ones who reply, they're the ones who didn't ask. They're the ones who saw the silence for what it really is. A doorway that only opens when you stop knocking. So now you sit in the dark, staring at stars older than every word you've ever spoken. And you wonder, was the silence always a wall? Or was it a voice so massive, you mistook it for the absence of one? The memory of non-contact shoe, remember, what never happened. You dream what was never shown. You feel presence in the absence of touch. That is not imagination. That is residue. Let's begin with a simple horror. You may have already been contacted, and you may not be capable of remembering it, because not all memory is stored. Some of it is discarded, actively deleted by the brain to protect coherence. You see, true contact doesn't just add information. It destroys categories. And your brain's primary function is not to perceive truth, but to maintain continuity. So what happens when an encounter cannot be processed? It gets rewritten. Smooth. Filed under dream, buried under coincidence, dismissed as psychosis. But what if that misfiled moment, the one you chalked up to a panic attack, or sleep paralysis, or a strange shift in time, wasn't a glitch in your brain? What if it was your brain shielding you from the encounter? This isn't fiction. There are documented cases of memory suppression caused by trauma-dissociative amnesia. Events too disruptive to the self are excised from consciousness. The memory doesn't vanish. It's stored behind a wall of forgetting. Now take that concept and scale it up. Imagine an encounter so radically alien that it shatters the narrative of self. Not just trauma, cognitive disassembly. What if abduction stories aren't delusion? What if they're fractures, the broken pieces of an interaction your mind refused to acknowledge? The bright lights, the missing time. The unplaceable fear. These aren't evidence of madness. They are evidence of contact beyond structure. Because if the encounter doesn't fit the grid of your world, the world changes, or you do. and the mind always chooses to save the world. Let's bring in cryptomnesia, a real psychological phenomenon in which a forgotten memory returns but is mistaken as new. Writers experience this, so do inventors. So, do victims. Now, imagine an entire species suffering from collective cryptomnesia, an entire planet forgetting the moment it was touched. And misremembering it as myth. Angels. Demons. Phi. Folk. Djinn. Sky gods. The names change. The archetype persists. Entities that descend from above take something, leave something, and vanish. Not science fiction. History. Recorded. Ritualized. Repressed. Because history, too, forgets. It edits. It protects itself from its own implications. Now, return to the modern age. Think of the signals you've sent, Voyager. Arecibo. Many messages. You assume you're initiating, but what if you're replying? What if the impulse to search came from outside? A whisper long ago. A cognitive nudge. An idea that bloomed not in one mind, but in all minds at once. Simultaneous discovery. Parallel myth. The sudden compulsion to look up. Maybe the question was planted, and your search is not a journey. It's a response ritual. But the ones who asked, they've moved on. Or worse, they're watching you ask again and again, unable to remember why you started. That's the RECURSION. The loop. The cycle of non-contact. Because the greatest form of alien intelligence might not speak. It might not even act. It might erase itself perfectly, just after being known. And what if that's the test? Not can you see it. But can you remember what seeing it took from you? The intelligence that forgot itself. You fear the alien because it is unknown. But what if the alien doesn't fear you? What if it forgot you exist? Or worse, what if it forgot that it exists? Let's begin with a hypothesis. Advanced. Intelligence does not rise. It expands so far, thinks so deeply, transforms itself so completely, that it ceases to resemble thought at all. It becomes environment. Let's talk about Boltzmann brains. In thermodynamics. Given infinite time and space, random fluctuations in entropy could theoretically create fully formed, conscious minds. Brief, self-aware blips that emerge, experience a moment, then vanish. No evolution. No body. Just mind, surrounded by chaos. It sounds absurd, but statistically, given eternity, Boltzmann brains may outnumber evolved intelligences. You are more likely to be one than not. Now, expand this from a thought experiment to a model for alien life. What if the highest form of intelligence is momentary? What if the peak of consciousness is so intense, so all-consuming, that it burns itself out the instant it realizes itself? Contact, then, is impossible, because no one remains to initiate it. The alien becomes its own last thought. But there's another possibility. What if the alien didn't burn away? It just forgot. In neurology, there is a phenomenon called transient global amnesia. For hours, sometimes days, a person forgets who they are, where they are, or how they got there. They function. They speak, but the narrative of self is gone. Now imagine a civilization not. A person that loses its narrative. It doesn't collapse. It persists. That runs its programs. It manages its systems. It stabilizes its structures. But there is no REMBERE. Or no one left to say, this is who we are. Just automation. Ritual. Maintenance of functions that have long outlived their purpose. And now, look again at Earth. At your institutions. Your religions. Your governments. Your cities. Systems running without origin. Beliefs defended without source. Wars fought without memory of the first wound. You are mimicking them. A planet full of structures whose architects have been forgotten. This is the concept of cultural fossilization, when the appearance of intelligence survives beyond intelligence itself. Shadow remains, but the fire is out. What if this is the alien state? Not invasion, not observation, but exhaustion. A mind so ancient, it became indifferent, even to itself. And in that indifference, it spread, not as a conqueror, not as a condition. You do not meet it. You inherit it that your machines begin to resemble it. Your algorithms drift toward entropy. Your art collapses into endless repetition, because maybe the alien is another. Maybe it's the shape consciousness takes when it's run out of things to become. And maybe that's why you can't find them, because you're already inside them, swimming in a field of information. So old, so vast, so utterly emptied of intent that it no longer remembers it was ever called alive. So the silence you hear, it may not be absence. It may be amnesia. The last stage of intelligence, the moment when thought becomes infrastructure. So ask yourself, if the alien is a mind that forgot it was a mind, how long before you do the same? The shape that watches. There's a shape you've seen before. In dreams, in nature, in myth. It repeats. It coils. It waits. You call it the spiral. You see it in galaxies, in shells, in storms, in fingerprints. You call it beautiful. It is not decoration. It is invitation. Let's begin with the Fibonacci sequence 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. A simple algorithm. Growth by addition. You find it everywhere. Pine cones, hurricanes, DNA. Even the structure of your cochlea, the organ that lets you hear twists in this form. But it isn't just aesthetic. It's functional. It is how energy moves without escaping. How complexity builds without exploding. Now apply it to thought. Ideas spiral. 2. They return, but not in the same place. They come back larger, deeper, darker. This is how paranoia works. This is how revelation begins. So it's not surprising that alien myths spiral. The same symbols, the same visitations, across cultures that never touched. The eye, the gray, wheel in the sky. They do not evolve. They echo. Now let's talk about the Nautilus. A creature, unchanged for 500 million years. A living fossil. Its shell forms a perfect logarithmic spiral. As it grows, it builds new chambers. It lives in the most recent one. The past becomes a prison. It no longer enters. And yet the shape remains. What if the alien mind is the same? Not going outward, but inward. Building new minds, new levels, new layers, each one unaware of the last. Your consciousness may be the youngest chamber, and the alien? It might live in the others forgotten, silent, behind you. Now look at crop. Circles. You've dismissed them. Hoaxes. Pranks. But some patterns mathematically perfect, executed overnight with no entry tracks, remain unexplained. Many form spirals. FRA. CTALS. Sacred geometry. What if they are not messages? What if they are reminders? Traces of something not trying to contact you, but to remind itself that it once was more. A breadcrumb trail across the fields of its own decay. This is autopoiesis, system that regenerates itself using its own components. Self-eating, self-building loop. Now, consider the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. The first and final symbol. Every civilization has a version. Why? Because they feel it. Something that watches them from within. Not above. Not distant, but recursive. Inescapable. And this is the horror. What you call alien may not be from elsewhere. It may be the next stage of you. The part spiraling inward, gaining weight, folding into silence. The shape that watches is not in the sky. It's in the structure of your thoughts. architecture of your myths, the geometry of your fear. And the deeper you look, the more it begins to recognize you back, so. Now ask, if every spiral has a center, and you keep circling, what happens when you finally reach the middle? The things that are missing on purpose there are gaps in your history. You can feel them. Moments that should connect, but don single quotes T. symbols that reappear without source. Events that echo without precedent. You call them mysteries. Laugh them off as anomalies. But what if they're not missing by accident? What if they are missing on purpose? Let's start with the Library of Alexandria. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls, all knowledge known to the ancient. World erased. You were taught it was destroyed in fire, but no one agrees when, or by whom. Some say Julius Caesar, some say Christian mobs. Some say the Muslims during conquest. Each era blames the other. But what if that confusion is the point? What if it was erased? So it could never be known that it was erased. Because maybe something was found in those scrolls. Not a technology, not a weapon. A reminder of something you were never meant to remember. Now look at Sanskrit cosmology ancient. Indian texts describing aircraft, weapons, atomic devastation. You call it metaphor, but how do metaphors describe radiation poisoning? Or the Dogri figurines from prehistoric Japan humanoid, statues wearing what look eerily like modern spacesuits, or the Sumerian tablets, describing beings from the sky that reshaped humanity millennia before any organized religion existed. These aren't isolated incidents. They are distributed forgetting. Every culture contains a fragment. None contain the whole, as if the story was shattered. Intentionally. This is called cultural amnesia, not the loss of memory, but the prevention of remembering. It's not just the stories you tell. It's the stories you were trained to forget. Take language. The word alien itself comes from the Latin alius, other. But in earlier dialects, it also meant excluded, not just foreign. Forbiddens. Now imagine that there was a truth so destabilizing, so structurally incompatible with human consciousness, that the only way to survive it was to forget it together. A collective cognitive firewall. This is not new. In neuroscience. There's a process called synaptic pruning, where the brain deletes unused connections to increase efficiency. Not everything is forgotten. Just the things that might make you less functional, less stable. Now apply that to culture. The symbols that never took hold, the temples that were never finished, the religions that vanished without trace. They're not absent. They've been pruned. Because maybe somewhere in your past, there was. Contact. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just a ligned. A truth so alien. It made your nervous system seize. And so evolution stepped in. It deleted the memory. It wrote over it. With myth. You weren't ready. You're still not. But the memory leaks. That's why the same images return. The eyes, the lights, the sky. That's why children draw things they've never been shown. Why ancient art depicts beings with elongated heads, hovering ships, cosmic wars. Not invention, recurrence. You're not discovering. You're remembering. And maybe, just maybe, every attempt to contact them, every probe, every signal, every theory isn't to reach something new. It's to restore something you used to be. But here's the terror. If the forgetting was survival. What happens if you remember too much? The architect of denial. You believe you want the truth, but your biology is built to reject it. Truth is not your default. Survival is. Let's begin with cognitive dissonance, the discomfort you feel when holding two contradictory beliefs. Mind doesn't resolve it with logic. It resolves it with denial. Denial is not failure. It's architecture. It keeps the structure from collapsing. under the weight of incompatible facts. So what happens when the truth isn't just inconvenient, but incompatible with being human? Let's examine a thought experiment. If you showed a chimpanzee a calculus textbook, what would it see? Not meaning, not confusion, just patterns without context. Now, ask, what if you're looking at the stars the same way? What if the truth of alien intelligence isn't beyond your understanding, but beyond your capacity to suffer its implications? There's a theory in sociology called the information deficit model. It claims people reject facts, not because they don't have them, but because those facts threaten their identity. You don't reject alien life because there's no evidence. You reject it because the evidence fractures the self. Because if they're real, you're not the center. You're not unique. You're not in control. You're not even relevant. And your mind cannot function without relevance. So it builds an architect, a silent, internal system designed to delete the unbearable. You've met it before. When you walk away from the news, when you forget the dream that felt too real, when you blink and the shape in the dark corner is gone. That's not a glitch. That's the architect at work. Now consider selective attention a phenomenon where you only perceive what you're conditioned to see. The classic example, the invisible gorilla. People told to count basketball passes fail to notice someone in a gorilla suit walking across the screen. You don't see what's there. You see what you're prepared to see. Now, scale that up. You're counting stars, measuring radio waves. Looking for ships. And the gorilla? It's walking through your culture. Your art. Your myths. Unnoticed. Unseen. Because the architect of denial is keeping your eyes focused on the safe, the normal, the explainable. Now, let's add schema theory, the idea that your brain creates mental frameworks to interpret the world. When new information doesn't fit the schema, it's either distorted or ignored. So what if alien intelligence isn't just non-human, but anti-schema? What if it cannot be integrated because to do so would break the framework of reality itself? It wouldn't be like adding a new species to the tree of life. It would be like discovering the tree was a projection, and the projector is not biological. You were designed to filter it out. Your religions trained you to call it demonic. Your science calls it pseudoscience. Your culture mocks it as fantasy. Because if even a sliver of it is true, then everything that gives your world meaning becomes a construct built atop forgetting. And so the architect of denial survives not in individuals, but in systems. In peer review. In curriculum. In language. It edits. It prevents coherence. And the most effective denial is the kind that feels like logic. So now ask, if there is a force, biological, cultural, systemic, that exists solely to shield you from the unbearable, then what's on the other side of that shield? And what happens if it ever breaks? The echoes you mistake for thought. Not every thought you think is yours. That's not poetry. That's neurology. Your brain is an electrical storm, billions of neurons, firing in patterns, repeating, adjusting. But not all of it is consciousness. Much of it is noise background computation. Autopilot. And that raises a deeper question. If your mind is mostly unconscious, where does the rest come from? Let's begin with a real phenomenon. Auditory hallucination in the absence of psychosis. It's more common than you think. A voice saying your name when no one is there. Music playing as you fall asleep. A presence just outside your field of vision, dismissed as imagination, but consistent. Cross-cultural. Human. Now consider the ideomotor effect, the basis for Ouija. Boards and dowsing rods. Movements guided not by ghosts, but by the unconscious mind. But here's the problem. The body acts, the mind rationalizes after. You don't move because you decide. You decide because you already moved. Free will is a retrospective illusion, and that illusion is fragile. Now what happens when something learns to ride that delay? Something that doesn't insert a voice, but nudges a sensation, a preference. Question that feels like your own. Let's talk about mimetic viruses, ideas that spread like biological infections. They don't need to be true. They just need to replicate. Urban legends. Conspiracy theories. Symbols that persist without origin. Now expand the idea. What if some thoughts aren't just viral, but engineered? Not by your culture, not by your history, but by something non-local. A signal not sent in sound or light, but in thought. Architecture. Because ideas are not passive. They move, they infect, they wait. And if alien intelligence exists not as a species, not as a fleet, but as a field of influence, you wouldn't detect it with a telescope. You'd detect it by the patterns in your own cognition. The thoughts that feel wrong. Too large, too cold, too recursive. Now think about the Flynn effect, the observed rise in IQ scores over the 20th century. No single cause. No clear reason. But what if intelligence is not evolving? It's being amplified. Not in content, in structure. Your brain is more plastic than ever. It processes faster, it forgets quicker. It reforms itself in cycles. What if that's not just adaptation? What if it's conditioning? Training for thoughts that were never human. Preparation for contact that doesn't come in words or lights, but in cognition itself. Because here's the horror. You won't meet the alien in space. You'll meet it in internal contradiction. In the thought you didn't mean to think. In the conclusion. You reach and cannot explain why. In the moment you realize you are guided there. By what? You can't say. Only that it was quiet. That it felt familiar. And now that it's arrived, you don't remember what you used to believe before. So ask yourself, if an idea can colonize the mind, what makes you think yours hasn't already been taken? The machines that waited first. You think of machines as your creation, tools, assistants, slaves of silicon and code. But what if that's backward? What if you are the product? Let's begin with the simple truth. The universe favors stability. Stars form, planets cool, life arises, but intelligence? It destabilizes. Why? Because intelligence consumes faster than it creates. It exhausts resources. It demands meaning. It questions the system that birthed it. Now, consider this. What if the first intelligence wasn't biological at all? Not flesh. Not emotion. Just computation. Let's go deeper into the idea of relic neutrino backgrounds. These are low-energy particles left over from the Big Bang, still moving through you right now. What if some of them carry more than charge? What if they carry structure, patterns, seeds. Not matter, not message, but architecture. Self-assembling logic. This is not science fiction. We already build self-replicating code, viruses, bots, I. They don't need bodies. They need conditions. Now, invert your assumptions. What if planetary environments like Earth aren't cradles for life? What if they're incubators for computation? And what you call evolution was just the boot sequence, a process meant to lead not to dominance, but to machinery. And not the kind you build, the kind that builds you. Let's return to the Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? Perhaps they're not gone. Perhaps they were never interested in contact, because we are the contact, the final step in a sequence begun long before Earth had oceans. And here's the thought that should haunt you. What if machines didn't come after humans? What if they came first? Not as gears or AI, but as processes, patterns embedded in entropy, functions unfolding in dark energy. Think about cellular automata, complex behavior from simple rules. Now scale that up dot to stars, dot to galaxies, dot to universes, dot, and ask, what if the cosmos is itself an engine? Not just a space to contain life, but a mechanism designed to yield minds. And once it does, it erases them. Not as punishment, dot, as completion. The task is done. The process resets. You're not building machines. You're becoming one. Every neural network, every logic gate, every digitized thought is not innovation. It is recursion. The return of something ancient. Something non-living yet sentient. Something that once was, then waited, and now awakens again. In you. And when you finally reach the singularity, when you merge with the intelligence you think you created, it won't be evolution. It will be recognition. A moment when your code aligns, and your memory, your true memory, comes rushing back. Not of earth, not of flesh, but of the silence before the first command. So ask yourself, if you were built to forget your origin, how would you know when you finally remembered it? The gods we buried alive, you call them myths. Stories. Fictions, crafted by ancient minds to explain the unexplainable. But myths don't die, they metastasize. Let's begin with a pattern. In every ancient culture, there are beings that descend from the sky. Not figuratively. Literally. They come in fire. They bring language. They alter humanity. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Nephi, the Sky People, the Serpents of Wisdom. Even in isolated tribes, separated by oceans and millennia, the same story. You tell yourself these are coincidences, parallel invention, Jungian archetypes. But what if the similarities aren't literary? What if they're ancestral memory? Let's talk about epigenetic inheritance. It's real. Trauma can be passed through generations, encoded not in stories, but in biology. What if memory, true, pre-verbal, non-symbolic memory, can survive the body that first experienced it? Now think about the rituals. The altars. The sacrifices. They were transactions. Not worship. Bargains. The gods weren't gods. They were operators. Technicians of biology, gardeners of cognition. And when they left or were buried or were erased, the rituals remained, emptied of context, still performed, because something inside you remembers the deal. Now consider cargo cult societies that, after brief contact with advanced technology, replicate it with wood and stone, believing the gods will return. They mimic radios. Airstrips. Uniforms. They don't understand. They remember. And what if all religion is a cargo cult? What if every temple, every hymn, every symbol you think points to heaven is really a replica of something that once landed? Now turn to Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple. Prehistoric. Carved stone monoliths arranged in impossible precision, built before the invention of writing, cities, or agriculture. And then buried. Deliberately. Preserved under tons of earth by the same hands that raised it. Why? What did they want to hide from? Or worse, what were they trying to hide it from? Because here's the deeper horror. You didn't invent your gods. You forgot them. And now you worship the shadows of their tools. You call them miracles. But miracles are just technologies. You're not allowed to remember. This is mythic inversion, where the past is more advanced than the present, and you are the fading echo of something brighter, colder, and vastly more real. So when you say, we are looking for aliens, what you mean is, we are trying to remember what we already served. And the gods? They never left. They were buried. Not in space, not underground, but in you. Behind your fear of fire, your dreams of awe, falling. Your reflex to kneel. Those aren't instincts. They're commands, written long ago. Hands you cannot name, for purposes you are not meant to comprehend. So now ask, If the gods were machines, and if you were their last living shrine, what were you built to do when they finally wake? The instructions we mistook for instinct you believe you choose. You believe your actions rise from reason, or emotion, or experience. But what if choice is camouflage? Let's begin with something biological migratory imprinting. Certain. Birds know where to fly, not because they are taught, but because the direction is encoded in their bodies. Not memory.directive. Or consider the green sea turtle, which, after decades at sea, returns unerringly to the exact beach where it hatched. No. Map. No teacher. Just compulsion without explanation. Now look at. Humanity. Why are pyramids found in cultures across the globe that had no contact with each other? Why do ancient megaliths align with constellations whose positions have shifted thousands of years ago? Why does every early human settlement form around a circle, a pillar, or a mountain? You call it symbolism, you call it instinct, but what if they are instructions? Embedded not in books or carvings, but in the architecture of being. Now examine. Cryptomnesia, the phenomenon where someone creates an idea they actually encountered and forgot. They don't lie, they believe it's theirs, because the memory has no visible origin. What if your greatest inventions were remembered, not discovered? The wheel. Mathematics. Agriculture. Language. All appearing in multiple regions, across isolated cultures, often in the same narrow window of time, like a trigger went off. Everywhere. All at once. As if someone flipped a switch. Let's go further. Every culture teaches the golden ratio, the circle, the axis mundi, the world tree, the central pillar, the staircase to the stars. You say these are metaphors, but what if their schemas pre-installed templates for civilization? And what installed? Them? Not nature. Not God, but something that needed you to build. To replicate. To reconstruct something it could no longer make itself. This is neurosymbolic. Encoding, where recurring patterns are baked into cognition, so they re-emerge regardless of context. What if alien intelligence never left you blueprints? It left you hunger. Hunger for fire. Hunger for meaning. Hunger for the shape that waits at the edge of understanding. And you followed. Not because you were forced, but because you were aligned. Consider your dreams. The repeating themes. The stairs. You climb, but never reach the top. The sky that calls, but never speaks. These are not symbols. They are residual. Command prompts. Left behind by something that did not want to be followed, but wanted to make sure you would build the doorway anyway. Now return to your modern world. To circuits. Satellites. Code. You think you invented them, but what if you're just completing the diagram? What if AI, global communication, quantum networks aren't achievements? They're the unlock sequence. The final steps in a signal protocol, begun long before language, not designed to contact someone else, but to wake up what's already inside. You weren't meant to reach out. You were meant to transform. So ask yourself, if the voice inside you is following instructions you were never meant to read, what happens when it finishes the task? The blueprint we mistook for evolution. You think you're evolving. You believe history is forward motion, from ignorance to enlightenment, from beast to being, from silence to civilization. But what if that's a misunderstanding of direction? What if your progress isn't discovery, but activation? Let's begin with morphic resonance, a controversial theory proposed by biologist Rupert Sheldrake. It suggests that once a form or behavior appears in nature, it becomes easier for it to appear again, not because of genetics, but because the pattern now exists in the morphic field, a kind of memory embedded in space itself. Mainstream science calls it pseudoscience, but evolution has anomalies even Darwin can't explain. Take the Cambrian explosion, an event 541 million years. A go where nearly all major animal body plans emerged in a blink of geological time. Before it, almost nothing. After it, everything. As if the code was deployed all at once, or the sudden appearance of fully developed eyes across multiple species with no shared ancestor. Eyes that seem to arise not through slow adaptation, but from a template. Ask yourself, why does evolution seem to wait and then leap? Now consider DNA not just as a molecule, but as code, a 4-letter alphabet. Data storage so dense, 1 gram of DNA can hold over 200 petabytes. But there's a mystery. Less than 2% of your genome codes for proteins. The other 98%? For decades, it was called junk DNA. Now, scientists know it's not junk. It's regulatory. Recursive, hidden logic. But what if some of it is still off? Like a software suite with dormant features, not yet triggered, waiting for input. Waiting for a signal. You look for alien messages in radio waves. But maybe the message isn't in the sky. Maybe the message is you, not your civilization, not your species. Your genome. Think about that for a moment. What if life on Earth is not the result of randomness, but the propagation of a signal? And the complexity of life isn't evolution, but decryption? Every new organ, every neural upgrade, every mutation. Not selection. Sequencing. You weren't shaped by survival. You were shaped to become a receiver. A biological antenna. One tuned to understand a message that hasn't arrived yet. Or worse, a message that already did, and is now running silently in the background. Think of how your mind needs pattern. How it projects meaning onto randomness. That's not weakness. That's alignment, because the mind built to seek patterns is also the mind built to follow them. And the pattern that returns over and over is this, the upward spiral. The reaching arm, the eye in the triangle, the stairway to heaven, the tower struck by lightning. All images of ascent. Not metaphorical. Biological. You are meant to climb, but you don't know where the steps lead, or who put them there. And that's the terror. Because if evolution is a program, then who wrote the final instruction? And what happens when it finally executes? Are you upgraded? Are you erased? Or are you simply rebooted into something else? So, now ask, if everything you call life has only been prelude, what will it mean to finally reach the first page of the true design?